Hey everyone, welcome back to another podcast for artists. I feel like every time I talk to another artist these days, the conversation inevitably turns to social media.
Yeah.
And not in a good way most of the time.
Yeah.
There's this like undercurrent of frustration or even disappointment,
hmm
because for so long we were told that social media was going to be this great equalizer.
Yeah, it was going to be the
It
solution.
was supposed to be this like borderless gallery, this direct connection to collectors and fans.
Yeah. Democratize the whole art world.
And to be fair, it did deliver on some of those promises initially, right?
For sure. In the early days, it felt like anything was possible.
But these days, it just feels like the landscape has shifted.
It really has. The game's changed.
Yeah. So in this episode, we're going to really try to unpack some of the core challenges artists are facing with social media right now.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about why those algorithms can feel so opaque and frankly, sometimes unhelpful. The very real difficulties in trying to build genuine relationships with your audience in this kind of digital space.
Yeah.
And the emotional toll it can all take.
It's heavy.
It can be really heavy. And then once we kind of get through some of those key frustrations, we'll turn our attention to solutions. We'll talk about some concrete, actionable steps artists can start taking right away
Yeah.
to try and navigate this often very confusing world of social media
Right.
and ideally make it a tool that actually supports their art rather than hindering it.
Yeah. That's the dream.
So let's just dive right in. And I think the first thing we need to talk about are those algorithms.
Yeah. The dreaded algorithms.
Right, because it comes up in every conversation I have with artists.
All the time.
You spend weeks or even months pouring your heart into a piece.
Mhm.
You finally share it online and it's crickets.
Silence.
Nothing.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, you post a picture of your cat.
Right. Or like your lunch.
Yeah, exactly. And it
Mm.
gets like 1,000 likes.
It goes viral.
So what's going on there? Why do those algorithms seem to work against us so often?
Well, I think it's important to remember that the primary goal of these algorithms is not actually to showcase artistic merit
Right.
or even to help artists connect with fans.
Mm-hmm.
Think of it this way. The algorithm is basically a massive recommendation engine. Its fundamental purpose is to keep users scrolling and engaged with the platform for as long as possible,
Right.
because that engagement translates into advertising revenue for the platform.
So it's really about maximizing their profit, not necessarily helping artists succeed.
Exactly. And that's why you see this phenomenon of the engagement trap.
Right, the engagement trap. Tell me more about that.
So the algorithms are designed to reward content that gets quick and easy engagement, likes, comments, shares.
Okay.
And sometimes that means prioritizing a funny meme or a visually striking image over a more nuanced work of art that might take more time to appreciate.
That's so frustrating because you're basically being encouraged to create content that's designed for the algorithm,
Yeah.
not necessarily content that's true to your artistic vision or even content that might lead to sales.
Right. And it creates this pressure to kind of chase trends and create content that's going to get those quick hits of dopamine.
And it can really distort your sense of what's valuable.
Yeah. You start to second guess yourself.
Absolutely.
Like, is my art even good if it's not getting likes?
Exactly. And it can also be really discouraging when you've poured your heart into a piece and you feel really proud of it, but then it gets like 2 likes. And
Right.
it's like, what's the point?
It feels like shouting into the void.
Exactly. And on the flip side, you can have a piece that, you kind of threw together quickly
Yeah.
and it goes viral and you're like, wait, what?
Right.
This isn't even my best work, but it's the one that's getting all the attention.
Right.
And it can really mess with your head.
Yeah. It makes you question your own
Yeah.
judgment.
Absolutely. And then there's this whole issue of consistency, right? The algorithm tends to reward accounts that post really frequently. But creating art takes time. You can't just churn out masterpieces every day.
Right. Exactly. You need time to experiment,
Yeah.
to fail, to refine your idea.
Exactly. And so you're kind of stuck in this dilemma. Do you compromise your creative process to satisfy the algorithm and maybe post more often, but maybe the quality suffers?
Yeah.
Or do you stay true to your pace and your vision and risk being less visible?
It's a tough choice.
Yeah, it's a real struggle. And then on top of all of that, there's the fact that organic reach seems to be declining across all these platforms.
Yeah. It's a well-documented trend.
So even if you've diligently built up a following, you're increasingly being asked to pay to actually reach them.
It's the pay-to-play game.
Right.
And it can be really frustrating for artists who are already struggling to make ends meet.
Absolutely. You're basically being told that you have to spend money to get your art seen, even by the people who have already chosen to follow you.
Right, and it creates this uneven playing field
Yeah.
where visibility is more about your budget than about the quality of your work.
And it just feels like it goes against the whole original promise of social media, right?
Yeah, the idea that it was going to be this free and open space for artists to connect.
But increasingly, it feels like it's just becoming another advertising platform.
It's a business at the end of the day.
Okay, so we've talked about the algorithm, the engagement trap, the pressure for constant posting, the pay-to-play system.
Hmm.
Now let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the actual act of selling art on these platforms.
Okay.
Because for a lot of artists, that's ultimately the goal, right?
Yeah, to turn that online presence into income.
Exactly. But here's the thing. Even when you manage to get people to see your work, actually converting those views into sales can be surprisingly difficult.
It really can be a whole new set of challenges.
So why is that?
Well, one reason is that the platforms themselves often seem to discourage anything that looks too commercial.
Okay.
If you have a post that explicitly mentions prices or have a link to your online shop,
Yeah.
it often gets penalized by the algorithm.
It's like they're trying to keep people on their platform
They don't want you driving traffic away to your own website.
because then they can't show them ads.
Right.
So it's this kind of catch-22, you need to use social media to reach people. But then the minute you try to actually sell them something,
You get punished.
yeah, it feels like the rug gets pulled out from under you.
It can be really frustrating.
It really can. And then there are the actual logistical limitations of selling on these platforms.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you know that single clickable link in your Instagram bio?
The infamous link in bio.
Right. Or the swipe up feature that's only available to accounts with a certain number of followers.
Right. You have to jump through all these hoops.
It creates so much friction for potential buyers. They have to go to your profile, they have to find the link, they have to click on it, then they get taken to another website. And every step of the way, there's a chance they're just going to give up.
Yeah, it's not exactly a seamless shopping experience.
Definitely not. And then there's this whole other issue that I think a lot of artists aren't even aware of,
Yeah.
which is content ownership.
Right.
When you share your art on these platforms,
Mm-hmm.
you're essentially granting them a license to use that content.
And those licenses can be pretty broad.
Yeah, so even though you still technically own the copyright to your work,
Mm-hmm.
the platform can use it for their own marketing purposes or even potentially use it to train artificial intelligence.
Which is a whole other can of worms.
Yeah, it's kind of scary when you think about it.
It is, especially when you consider that they're doing it without your explicit consent.
Right. It just feels like another way that artists are being taken advantage of.
It's definitely something to be aware of.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've talked about the algorithms. We've talked about the challenges of selling.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about vanishing engagement. You might have thousands of followers, but only a tiny fraction of them are actually seeing your posts.
Yeah, it's a real phenomenon.
So what's going on there?
Well, there are a few factors at play. One is that the platforms are constantly shifting their focus. Right now it's all about short-form video content.
Yeah, Reels and TikToks and all that.
Exactly. And if you're not creating that kind of content, you're going to get less visibility.
Yeah, and it makes it really hard to build a sustainable online presence.
You feel like you're always playing catch up.
Exactly, and it can be incredibly frustrating.
It is. It's exhausting.
And all of this chasing of the algorithm, this pressure to adapt to the ever-changing rules of the game, it takes a toll. So let's talk about the human cost of social media.
Okay.
Because it's something that I think a lot of people don't talk about enough.
No, they don't.
But behind the scenes, there's a lot of struggle.
There really is.
So
Yeah.
what are some of the ways that social media is impacting artists' mental health?
Well, one of the biggest issues is anxiety. You're constantly checking your notifications, wondering if your latest post is getting any likes.
Yeah, it's like you're always waiting for that validation.
And it could be really addictive. And then when you don't get the response you were hoping for, it can be really deflating.
Yeah, it can make you feel like you're not good enough. And it can also trigger creative blocks.
Yeah.
Because you're so focused on what's going to perform well online that you lose touch with your own artistic vision.
Start creating for the algorithm instead of for yourself.
Exactly. And then there's the burnout.
Oh, yeah.
The constant pressure to create content, to market yourself, to engage with your followers.
It's relentless.
So we've painted a pretty bleak picture here.
Yeah, it's not all sunshine and rainbows.
Definitely not. But it's important to acknowledge these challenges
I agree.
so that we can start to find solutions.
Right.
So let's shift gears now and talk about some practical actionable steps
Yeah.
that artists can take to try and make social media work for them.
Yeah, let's get practical.
Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is diversification.
Okay.
You know, don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Don't rely on just one platform.
Exactly. Because if that platform suddenly changes its algorithm
Mm-hmm.
or even goes away completely, you're kind of starting from scratch.
You're back to square one.
So how do you recommend artists diversify their online presence?
Well, I think the first step is to really analyze where you're getting the most engagement and, more importantly, where you're actually getting sales or meaningful connections.
Right.
And then focus your energy on those platforms.
So don't be afraid to abandon a platform if it's not working for you. You know, if you're spending hours on Twitter
Yeah.
and you're not getting anything out of it, maybe it's time to cut your losses.
Right. And focus on something else.
And I think it's also important to use each platform strategically. So, for example, Instagram is obviously very visual, so it's a great place to showcase your art.
Right.
But LinkedIn is more about professional networking,
Exactly.
so you might use that to connect with galleries or collectors.
And then YouTube is great for sharing longer form content.
Yeah, like process videos or tutorial.
Exactly. So tailor your content to each platform.
Okay, so diversify your platforms. Don't be afraid to abandon the ones that aren't working.
Right.
And use each platform strategically.
Yep.
Okay, that's a great starting point. Now, what about building your own platform?
Oh, that's crucial. So what do we mean by that?
Well, essentially, it means creating a space online that you control.
Okay.
So that's things like having your own website and building an email list.
Because with social media, you're kind of at the mercy of the algorithm. But with your own website and email list,
You're in charge.
you're in the driver's seat.
Yeah.
Okay, so the first step is to create a simple website. It doesn't have to be anything fancy.
Yeah, just a place where people can see your work.
And learn more about you.
Okay. And then how do you start building an email list?
Well, there are a lot of great tools out there like MailChimp or ConvertKit.
Mm-hmm.
And the key is to offer something valuable in exchange for people's email addresses.
Okay, so like a free download or a discount.
Exactly.
And then you can send regular newsletters with updates about your work.
And exclusive offers.
Okay, so that's a great way to stay top of mind with your audience.
Yeah, and it's a much more reliable way to reach people than social media.
Because with email, you know they're actually going to see your message.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about diversifying your platforms and building your own platform.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about connecting with your audience, building those genuine relationships.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, that's what it's all about, right?
Yeah, it's about connecting with people who love your art.
So how do you recommend artists go about building those relationships online?
Well, I think one of the most important things is to be authentic. Let people see your personality. Share the stories behind your work.
Yeah,
Don't be afraid to be vulnerable.
because people connect with people.
Yeah. They don't connect with brands.
Right.
Connect with human beings.
So let your personality shine through.
Exactly.
And don't be afraid to show the messy parts of the creative process.
Yeah, the struggles, the failures, the breakthroughs.
Because that's what makes it real.
Exactly.
And I think it's also important to engage with your audience.
Yeah, respond to comments, answer questions,
Yeah, have conversations.
make them feel seen and heard.
Absolutely, because the more you engage with your audience, the more they're going to feel invested in you and your work.
It's about building community.
Okay, so we've talked about diversifying your platforms, building your own platform, and connecting with your audience. Now let's talk about collaboration.
Okay. Because I think that's another really important strategy for artists.
Yeah, it's a great way to reach new audiences.
So how do you recommend artists go about finding collaborators?
Well, I think the first step is to identify artists or businesses that align with your values and then reach out to them.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to just send a DM or an email.
And what are some good ways to collaborate?
Well, you could do a joint giveaway,
Okay.
or you could co-host a live stream or a workshop,
Mm-hmm.
or you could even collaborate on a piece of art together.
Yeah, there are so many possibilities.
And it's a win-win for everyone involved.
Absolutely. Because you're both getting exposure to each other's audiences
Right.
and you're building relationships with other creatives.
Yeah, it's a great way to expand your network.
Okay, so we've talked about diversification, building your own platform, connecting with your audience, and collaboration.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I want to talk about something that I think is really important,
Okay.
which is taking care of yourself.
Yes. Self-care is essential because all of this pressure to be on social media all the time, to create content, to engage,
Yeah.
it can be really overwhelming. So what are some things that artists can do to protect their mental health?
One of the most important things is to set boundaries.
Oh,
Decide how much time you're going to spend on social media each day and stick to it.
don't let it consume you.
Right.
And don't be afraid to take breaks.
Yeah, if you're feeling overwhelmed,
Mhm.
just log off for a while.
Yeah. Go for a walk.
Spend time with loved ones.
Do something that brings you joy.
Recharge your batteries.
Absolutely. And I think it's also important to remember that social media is just a tool.
It's not the be-all and end-all.
It's not the reason you create art.
Right.
So don't let it define you.
Yeah.
Don't let it dictate your creative process.
Stay true to yourself.
Exactly. So to wrap things up, I think the biggest takeaway from this conversation is that social media is a double-edged sword.
Yeah, it can be both a blessing and a curse.
It can be a powerful tool for connecting with people and building your career, but it can also be a source of stress, anxiety, and burnout.
Right.
So it's really important to use it intentionally and mindfully.
Yeah, be strategic,
Set boundaries,
take care of yourself.
and most importantly, don't forget why you create art in the first place, because that's what truly matters.
That's the heart of it all.
Yeah. So for more in-depth insights and actionable strategies, be sure to click on the article link in the description.
It's called The Broken Promise of Social Media for Artists and What You Can Do About It.
And it's on marketyourart.net. Until next time, keep creating.
And stay true to yourselves.